Hey guys, welcome to Linux System Administration Intermediate Level. And for those of you that have been following me, as always, I am the instructor Kevin Downs, and welcome back. So let's go ahead and get started on this new course, and let's talk about a little bit about me. If you're new to these courses that I instruct, so here's a little bit about me. I'm a RedHat Certified System Administrator, or RHCSA, and at my current job, I'm in charge of administering hundreds of servers running on different Linux distributions. I work as a Unix system administrator, providing support for large enterprise-level clients with IBM across multiple environments. So as an RHCSA, I'm adept at Linux programming for managing both personal and server Linux systems. Currently, I'm pursuing my RedHat Certified System Engineer and DevOps. So guys, before you go on with this course, if you haven't done Introduction to Linux OS and Linux Management for System Admins, I highly recommend that you go do those first, okay? The topics covered in those courses, as well as how to install the virtual lab, is paramount to being successful in this course, okay? So please do those two courses before doing this course. And I do teach those too as well. So in this first session for this course, we're going to be working with the Linux kernel, okay? So as a quick refresher, in our previous class we covered the following topics: sysadmin overview, installation and configuration, booting and shutting down Linux, managing software and devices, managing users and groups, the Linux file system, Linux file security, and controlling processes. So since this course is a follow-up of our last couple sysadmin courses, guys, we are not going to go over how to install and set up CentOS. CentOS is what we'll be using for this course. Ubuntu is what we used in that Intro to Linux OS course. We're going to be using CentOS in this one, okay? So if you haven't already, install CentOS on your machine, take our previous course, or visit CentOS website to learn how to install CentOS 7 on your VirtualBox. However, again, I highly recommend that you take those other two courses before you do this one, guys. Alright, let's go and get started with what we're going to be doing in this session. So we're going to go over Linux Kernel Components, types of kernels, kernel configuration options, and recompiling the kernel, okay? So guys, we're going to do a very high-level overview of what the kernel is, as well as how it works and what we're going to be using it for, okay? Here's a quick diagram or visual representation of what the kernel is, okay? So remember, the kernel is what directly interacts with the hardware on the computer, okay? So we have the hardware here, and the kernel interacts with the hardware, and then above that we have the architecture-dependent kernel code. Then we have the kernel itself, the system call interface, the GNU C library, or glibc is what people will refer to that commonly as. Then we have user applications, okay? So up here we have the user space. This is what the users are really interacting with all their applications and programs. And below this, we have the kernel space. We have all the system calls, the kernel itself, and the code at the bottom, okay? All of this makes up the Linux system, though, okay? So here's a high-level review of kernel components in a Linux system, okay? If you're really not sure or don't remember these, or you need a little bit of a refresher, go ahead and read the articles on the resource slide to learn more about each component. That's going to be at the end of this PowerPoint session, okay, and I'll point those out again. But they are memory management, process management, IPC, or inter-process communication, file systems, networking, and device control and device drivers, okay? So let's talk about types of kernels. There are, of course, different ways to build a kernel and architectural considerations when building one from scratch. In general, most kernels fall into one of three types: monolithic, microkernel, and hybrid. Linux is a monolithic kernel, okay, and Windows 7 is going to use a hybrid kernel, guys. So what is a monolithic kernel? Oops. Let me go back to the other slide. So a monolithic kernel is an operating system architecture where the entire operating system is working in that kernel space, guys, okay? Now the difference is in a microkernel, okay, we have the near minimum amount of software that's needed to provide mechanisms to implement an operating system, okay? So it's almost the bare minimum of stuff needed to actually operate the system, okay? Now a hybrid kernel, guys, is going to be the best of both worlds. It's going to be a little bit of the monolithic architecture and a little bit of the microkernel architecture, okay? And hybrid is what Windows uses. So let's talk about kernel configuration options. The Linux kernel is usually found in the kernel source in the file user source linux.config, okay? It is not recommended to edit this file directly, but to use one of these configuration options. So we can use the make config option, and this starts a character-based question and answer session. We can use the make menu config, which starts a terminal-oriented configuration tool. And we can use the make x config, which starts an x-based configuration tool. Okay. Now, guys, I'm not going to show any of these commands, okay, because there's a lot of things you need to download in order to actually start compiling a kernel. Okay, so I just want you to be aware of these tools. Okay. Same for this slide on recompiling the kernel. Okay, it shows a list of commands here, but again, you're going to need to install a lot of things and get some things configured and in order to actually reconfigure your kernel. So we're not going to demo that. We just want you to, and I want you to be aware of the fact that you can compile your own custom kernel and recompile it. Okay. So here below, if you want to be sure you have everything you need, you can rebuild your kernel without touching anything. You have to do this as root, and you'd have to enter the following commands. You'd have to cd to usr, src, Linux, then you would have to use the make command clean, then make modules underscore install, make install, and then reboot your machine. Okay. Again, I'm not going to demo those. Just be aware of these options here for recompiling the kernel, as well as in this slide here, the different options you can use to configure the kernel options. Okay. Let's move on to our final slides here with the resources. So again, these are the resources here you can follow to learn a little bit more about how those kernel workspace works. Okay. Definitely click on these links, guys, and brush up on your memory, as well as kind of develop a little bit further understanding of the kernel. So in summary, we went over Linux kernel components, types of kernels, kernel configuration options, and recompiling the kernel. We did this at a very high level, guys, okay? As a sysadmin, you're not going to be delving too deep into the kernel itself. You just need to be aware of what it is, how it works, and maybe need to look into the process of configuring it manually. So next session, guys, we're going to cover shell script fundamentals, bash shell syntax overview, and shell script examples. As always, guys, follow these links if you need a little bit of extra help. We have weekly and monthly plans available for private tutoring sessions for a sysadmin, as well as private tutoring sessions for Linux and bash scripting. Thank you so much, guys. Looking forward to seeing you in session 2.